Making excuses at a very early age, don't we? Has anybody ever tried to tuck a child into bed and they didn't want to go? They come up with, I'm scared. There's always monsters under the bed. Or, I need my blankie. Or, I'm thirsty. Or, my pajamas are so scratchy. The ones I want are in the laundry, of course. Anyone who ever dieted? Anybody tried to get healthy? Lots of excuses there. I only ate part of that cake. Or my husband's favorite pizza is 4 food groups in one. Maybe I'll only eat healthy tomorrow. I'll start my diet on Monday. My favorite is I did a lot of exercise today, so now I deserve ice cream. Today's scriptures in Exodus tell about Moses, who is one of my favorite people in the Bible. Mostly because I'm good at excuses also. God called on him to lead the Israelites to freedom. It's nice to think that if God calls us, especially from a burning bush, that we would jump up and try to do what he wants us to do. But what God calls Moses to do is way out of his comfort zone. Not only does he need to gain the trust of the Israelites, but he needs to march up to a very powerful leader and make some convincing demands. Even though Moses and God were very in close relationship, Moses pushes back. God even gives him miracles to perform to prove that he is sent by God, and still Moses makes excuses. Moses had a lot of trust in God, and yet he still questions if he's able to do what God has asked him to do. He knew it wouldn't be easy, maybe even a little crazy, to convince people to enter a wilderness for God knew how long, literally. He knew they would have doubts, and he knew they would have questions, and they might not believe him. I feel comforted that someone as close to God as Moses was still questioned God and still made excuses. He argues, I'm not good enough. I don't know the answers to the questions they'll ask. I'm not very good with words. Or people won't take me seriously. What is it that keeps us making excuses? Today I'd like to talk about 3 reasons that Moses made excuses that may very well be some of the same reasons that we keep making excuses when God is calling us to do something that makes us a little uncomfortable. The first one is, I'm not good enough. There has to be somebody better. In the scriptures, Moses says, what if they don't believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? Throughout scripture, we see God using regular, normal, imperfect people for the sake of his mission. When I was on a youth retreat, when my kids were in junior high, they had a band there, and Peter Ide performed a song called As Is. I'm going to read the lyrics to you in a minute, and it's about a lot of sinners from the Bible that God used in big ways. They got a kick out of all these people. The band's going to play it later, so you can listen to it. I'm going to try really hard to speak it and not sing it, because that would not be good. So here are some of the lyrics. As is, he chooses us as his. Moses was a stutterer. David was a murderer. Jeremiah suicidal and naked in the street. Paul had problems with specifics left unsaid. Timothy had stomach aches, and Lazarus was dead. Samson was a long-haired, arrogant womanizer, and Rahab was a scarlet-corded lady on the street. John the Baptist eating bugs and honey on his bread. Gideon a scaredy cat. Noah was a drunk man, and Abraham was a very old man. Jacob was a lying man, and Leah was the second best. Jonah should have followed God, but he ran away instead. Martha was a worrywart. Martha's my second favorite person in the Bible. Peter turned and ran away, and Jesus hung and bled. So God chooses people with some real problems. He's always had a thing for choosing people who aren't exactly perfect specimens and don't have picture-perfect pasts. Let me read a few of the examples that we looked up that night when we went back about these bad people in the Bible. God chose Gideon, a fear-driven wimp, to lead the army. God chose Ruth to be one of Jesus' ancestors, even though Ruth was childless, a widower, and a foreigner. Did I mention that Moses was a murderer and a stutterer? God chose Abraham to be the father of faith, even though Abraham had a serious lying problem. You might think, well, Noah, he must have been pretty perfect. Actually, after the flood, he got drunk and passed out completely naked. God chose Rahab for starring role in the Bible, and she was a prostitute. And God chose David, an adulterer, to be the leader of his people. The bottom line is that God has a history of choosing messy people with problems. So if you've ever felt unqualified, guess again. God's strength is your power over any weakness. We may have some pretty valid obstacles. We think that maybe excuses us from God's plan. When I was a teenager, a movie came out about Joni Eareckson. She was a teenager, and she was out. She loved horseback riding and swimming, and she and a group of her friends went to the lake, and she dove in not knowing how deep it was. She ended up breaking her neck that day, and she was paralyzed from the neck down. Has anyone heard of Joni Eareckson? Yeah. She had a hard time for many years. She struggled with life. She struggled with God. She struggled with her paralysis. But God sent people to help her, to regain her faith, and to help her. Since then, she actually got married. She's written 14 books. She's recorded several musical albums. She draws fabulous art with her mouth. She's actively involved as an advocate for disabled people. Joni learned to accept her disability, and Joni will let you know that a personal relationship with God has helped her overcome the obstacles she has in her life. The organization that she started over 40 years ago is called Joni and Friends. They state that they are committed to bringing the gospel and practical resources to people impacted by disabilities around the world. She now uses her circumstances and her challenges to help others. So the excuse number one of, I'm not good enough, is not going to cut it. The second excuse that we use is we're afraid to fail. In the scriptures it says, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. The Lord said, "Throw it on the ground." And Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake. He said, "Grab it." He grabbed it, and it turned back into a staff. "This," said the Lord, "is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." So what if I fail miserably? We need to remember that God often stretches us beyond what we think is possible. He calls us to do things that can be very uncomfortable. At the beginning of Exodus, Moses is called to a daunting task, but Moses doesn't respond with a lot of enthusiasm. Instead, he questions God. "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" God patiently responds reassuringly that he will be with Moses, giving him the tools, the tricks, the power, and the grace to deliver the people through the wilderness. God is like any parent, and like Pastor Bob said last week about patience, it takes a lot of patience. Teaching children to do things that maybe they haven't done before. Even our oh-so-patient God gets frustrated. In the scriptures, Moses says, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please, send someone else." Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother Aaron? I know he can speak well, and he's already on his way to meet you." How many times have we said in our head, "Please send someone else"? Like in school, when there's a quiz going on and the teacher's looking for someone to give an answer, and you put your head down and you hope that she's not going to call on you, which never worked for me. But Rick and I also have a pool in our backyard, and a lot of times we have guests over that have small children. The first thing is coaxing them into the pool because they don't know how deep it is. And usually they end up going over to the ladder, and they turn around, and they'll scoot down the ladder, and then they'll put their foot out to see if they can touch the bottom. Before you know it, they're swimming around in the pool. The next thing is they want to jump off the side into the pool. So they'll come over to the edge, they'll say, catch me, and I'll stand there and they'll say, catch me, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to count to 3, and I go 1, 2, 3, and nothing happens. They're frozen in fear. So I say, look, I remind them of the tools. You have swimmies on. I'm going to catch you. Just hold your breath, count to 3, and jump. 1, 2, 3, jump. Takes a lot of patience, but eventually they jump in. And before you know it, what are they doing? Jumping in and forgetting to tell you to hold out your hands. And I all want to jump in again and again and again. Anytime we do something that we haven't done before, it can make us uncomfortable. My husband likes roller coasters, and when we were first dating, he wouldn't date anybody that didn't do roller coasters, and I was kind of afraid. So we would get in line for the roller coaster, and for some reason, where that line goes around and around and around is always right next to where that first big hill is. So if you're not nervous enough when you're standing there waiting in line, you have to hear people screaming over and over and over again. But he pulled me through it, and I liked it, and I did it again, and it's probably why we're still married, because we do roller coasters together. We need to remember that if God has clearly called us to the tasks, that he will carry us through. He will give us the grace, he will give us the tools, and anything we need to accomplish our assignment. It may take practice, and it may not be perfect at first, but all he asks is our service and leaving the outcome to him. So we can't say we aren't good enough, and we can't let the fear of failing be an excuse. Finally, third, people won't believe me. I'm not good with words. God chose Moses to represent him, to be his spokesperson. And Moses was an unexpected choice because he had a serious stuttering problem. There are some that say Moses' speech issue wasn't quite a speech issue. It just says in the Bible that it was impeded speech. There's commentators that would suggest that rather than being a stutterer, he either just didn't know the language well, or he maybe had a lisp, or maybe he just didn't consider himself a strong public speaker. Many people like Moses have a thing that keeps them making excuses. Your thing may be that you have a speech impediment, or it might be that you're just really short. It could be that you're bald, or maybe you just rather not speak in front of a large group. Whatever the thing is, let it be a hurdle, not a wall. Hurdles can be jumped. Wikipedia defines glossophobia, or speech anxiety, as the fear of public speaking. Some people have this specific disorder, while others may also have a broader social phobia or a social anxiety phobia. The aspect of speaking publicly, whether it's in front of a group of unknown people or a close group of friends, is what triggers the anxiety for whoever is speaking. The speaker may be comfortable if they speak to a large group of unknown people, but when they have to speak to their own friends, they get nervous, or vice versa. So we get back to that fear. Have you ever had that kind of fear where you have to do something and it's like stepping off that ledge? There's many famous people who have a lot of experience public speaking, and also they're just used to being in front of crowds, and they've messed up. Steve Harvey announced the wrong winner of the Miss Universe pageant in 2015. He misread the card with her name on it. He announced Miss Columbia. They gave her the crown, they gave her the sash, they gave her the flowers before they realized the mistake. I'm not sure which was worse for Steve Harvey, the fact that he had so disappointed someone and honored someone or that he had to go out and say, oops, sorry, you actually won and you didn't. The most important announcement of that pageant, and he bluffed. He messed it up. I think that's why he's probably doing Family Feud now. Pop star Justin Bieber was 13 when he was discovered, and he skyrocketed to fame. So it's understandable that he didn't have a traditional education. Perhaps he just got confused, but when bragging in an interview, he said that he was detrimental to his own career, when what he meant was instrumental. We have all misspoke at times. Luckily, most of us don't end up on YouTube with it being watched a gazillion times. So let's debunk some of these excuses. We can't say we aren't good enough. We can't let a fear of failing be an excuse. And we don't have to be perfect speakers for people to believe us. Have you ever tried to explain away why you didn't, couldn't, shouldn't, or just wouldn't do something. Have you ever caught yourself making excuses when there are things you just don't want to do? We're skillful at making the art of excuses, aren't we? I don't know how. I didn't understand. I threw my back out bowling. I have to clean my house today. In the church world, we can find all sorts of excuses not to obey God's voice. And I think I've heard them all, and I've probably made them all. It's just not my gift. Or, I've already served my time, it's someone else's turn. We have never done it that way before. It's time for the younger generation to step up. Or, I'm just too busy, or too tired, or too old, or too young. I can tell you I made a lot of excuses trying to get out of doing this today. But what are excuses really? Excuses are rationalizations that we make to ourselves. They are invented reasons that we create to defend our behavior, to postpone taking action, or simply as a means of neglecting a responsibility. We make excuses to ourselves to feel less guilty. We need to remember that we need to trust God to give us the tools, the gifts, and the words to share our faith. What is it that keeps you from sharing your love of God and your appreciation for his forgiveness and grace? Is it that people won't believe you? Is it that you won't say the right words? Or maybe you think there's someone better to tell your friends or your family or your neighbors. I'd like to challenge you to step out of your comfort zone. The best part is that when God does the impossible through average and even very flawed people, we know it's all God. It's because of his abilities, not ours. Only he gets the credit, and only he gets the glory. Trusting God to give us the tools we need to complete a task is the first and most important step. Like when you stand on the edge of a pool and you have to jump in. Do you think you're not good enough? Because you are. Are you afraid? Because trusting God is what will give you the courage. Do you think you won't find the words? Because we have a book of words with instructions in it. Can you think of a time that you allowed yourself to make an excuse and told yourself it was a good reason? Let us pray. Dear God, our Father, we thank you for all that you have given us. We thank you for sending us a perfect example in Jesus. We thank you for your patience with us as we find the courage that we need. We ask you to continue to have patience and to continue to encourage and inspire us to share all that we have with those people who are close to us and also those of the many others who need to hear of your love and grace. We know we aren't perfect, but that you will be with us through it, even when we don't get it perfect the first time. Amen.